The triangles ABC and DEF are similar. In triangle ABC, AB is equal to 3x minus 6, and AC is equal to 16. In triangle DEF, DE is equal to 15, and DF is equal to x. And so here we have the diagram. And part A says, write down an equation in terms of x representing the relationship between the corresponding sides. Notice that it says that these two triangles are similar. But what does it mean for triangles to be similar? So here we have similar triangles. And for similar triangles, it means that they have the same shape, but not necessarily the same size. Another thing about similar triangles, their corresponding angles are equal. And another thing about similar triangles is that their corresponding sides are in the same ratio. And so if you notice carefully, we have this side B, right? And this side B corresponds with this side Q, right? So these two are corresponding sides. But what do we know about corresponding sides? The corresponding sides are in the same ratio. And so we have B over Q, B over Q. And so corresponding sides, so this is B over Q. And so because these two are corresponding sides, we form a ratio with them. So B over Q. Next, what else do we have? We have this side. This is C. And this side is R. And these two are corresponding sides. So C and R. And so we have them in the ratio. And then we have A and P. And these two are corresponding sides. And they are in this ratio. But what we know is that for similar triangles, this ratio and this ratio and this ratio, they are equal to each other. All right. And so that's what that's the understanding that we're going to move forward with when answering this particular question. Okay, let's move on. It says that write down an equation in terms of x representing the relationship between the corresponding sides. And so if you notice carefully that we have x and we have 16. These two are corresponding sides. We're going to put them in the same ratio. And what else? We have 15 and we have 3x minus 6. So we have 15 and we have 3x minus 6. And so those two are corresponding sides. So we put them in the same ratio as well. But what do we know? Well, we know that these ratios must be equal to each other because of what we learned about similar triangles, right? That when we put the sides in the same ratio, right, they're going to be equal to each other, all right? So B over Q is equal to C over R, and B over Q is equal to A over P. And so what that means is that x over 16 is going to be equal to 15 over 3x minus 6. And that's the answer for this particular question, because they want us to write down an equation in terms of x, and it's psi equation, showing the relationship between the corresponding sides. Next, it says, show that this equation simplifies to x squared minus 2x minus 80 is equal to 0. Now, this is the equation that we figured out. This is the equation that we got. And so we have to show that that equation is going to simplify to x squared minus 2x minus 80 is equal to 0. And so we have x over 16 is equal to 15 over 3x minus 6. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to cross multiply. What does that mean? That means that we take 16 and we multiply it by 15. And that also means that we take 3x minus 6. That's 3x minus 6, and we multiply it by x. All right, so what do? We take 16 multiplied by 15. Again, we take 16 and we multiply it by 15. And then we take 3x minus 6 and we multiply it by x. Again, we take 3x minus 6 and we multiply it by x. And so we have x multiplied by 3x minus 6. And we have 16 multiplied by 15, which we have right here, 16 multiplied by 15. And so what is 16 multiplied by 15? Well, 16 multiplied by 15 is 240. And so we have 3x squared because we distribute, right? So we say, okay, well, let's distribute. We have x times 3x, and we have x times negative x. I'm sorry, we have x times 3x, and we have x times negative 6. Again, we have x times 3x, and we have x times negative 6. And so we distribute. X times 3x is 3x squared. X times negative 6 is a negative 6x. And 16 times 15 is 240. Next, we are going to take 240 and we're going to send it over the equal sign like this. All right. And so when we send it over the equal sign, when we take 240 and we send it over the equal sign, we have 3x squared minus 6x minus 240. It was a positive 240, but when we send it over the equal sign, it becomes a negative 240. Next, we're going to divide each term in this equation by 3. So we divide each term of this, and so we divide each term of this in this equation by 3. And so when we divide by 3, what do we have? Well, we have that these two 3's cancel out. We know that 3 goes into itself once, but 3 goes into 6 2 times. We also know that 3 goes into itself once, but 3 goes into 240 80 times. And we know that 0 divided by 3 is simply 0. And so what do we have? We have that this 3 and this 3 cancels out, so we just left with x squared. And we have 2 times x, that's why we have 2 times x. Then we have 80, so we have 80 here. And so we have x squared minus 2x minus 80 is equal to 0. And so we showed that our equation simplifies to x squared minus 2x minus 80 is equal to 0. Next, it says solve this equation to determine the length df. And so we're going to solve this equation using the quadratic formula. And the general form for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. That's the general form, where a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant. So in this case, a is equal to 1, and a is equal to 1 because the coefficient of x squared is 1. In other words, the number in front of x squared is 1. So that means that a is equal to 1. The number in front of x, or the coefficient of x, is negative 2. So that's why we have b is equal, and so that's why we have b is equal to negative 2. Again, the coefficient of x is negative 2, or the number in front of x is negative 2. So that's why we have that b is equal to negative 2. And c is equal to negative 80. That's the constant. And so we're going to use the quadratic formula to help us to figure out what is going to be our solution. And so we have the quadratic formula, x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so we have that b is equal to negative 2 and b is equal to negative 2. And then we have c is equal to 80. So we have c is equal to negative 80, I should say. C is equal to negative 80. We have a is equal to 1. So a is equal to 1 and a is equal to 1. And then we have b is equal to negative 2. So b is equal to negative 2. B is equal to negative 2. And so after we substitute our values, we have to evaluate or compute this expression underneath the square root. So we have negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 80. So we have negative 2 squared minus 4 times 2, minus 4 times 1 times negative 80. And so when we evaluate that, we get 324. So we have that x is equal to, note that a negative times a negative is a positive. So we have a positive 2. So we have that x is equal to positive 2 plus or minus the square root of 324 all over 2. And so we're going to do x positive, which means that the positive sign is going to be in between these two terms. That's what we mean by x positive. Next, we have to consider x negative. And x negative just means that we want the negative sign in between these two terms. And so x positive means we have the positive sign in between these two terms, and x negative means that we have the negative sign in between these two terms. Next, we take the square root of 324, and the square root of 324 is 18. And so we have 2 plus 18. What is 2 plus 18? Well, 2 plus 18 is 20. And so we have 20 divided by 2, and 20 divided by 2 is definitely 10. So x positive is definitely 10. Next, we have to take the square root of 324, and the square root of 324 is 18. So we have 2 minus 18, and 2 minus 18 is negative 16. And so we have a negative 16 divided by 2, and negative 16 divided by 2 is negative 8. So x positive is 10, and x negative is negative 8. And so what do we have? Well, that means that df, right? Because we have to solve this equation, determine df. df is equal to x, and x in this case is equal to 10. So df is going to be equal to 10. Now, the length df cannot be negative since it is an actual measurement of a side of the triangle. Thus, we ignore the negative result. So a person may ask, well, why didn't we include x is equal to negative 8? Well, we don't include x is equal to negative 8 because it is a negative number. We have to use the positive number since we're dealing with an actual measurement of a side of a triangle. And so that means that df is going to be equal to 10. And so that's why df is 10, because x is 10, and we choose the positive result. And so that's the answer to this particular question.